Well, welcome everybody. It's so good to see you. Thank you for tuning into this live talk with Sabrina Görlitz. I'm here with Sabrina, and my name is April Bosshard. I'm a story coach and editor, and I work with writers who are working on memoirs and screenplays and novels. So that's sort of what I do in general. And I have a deep interest in the work that Sabrina does, and we found some ways to combine our two skill sets. So Sabrina is in Germany, and she's tuning in from Hamburg this evening. And Sabrina is a story nurse. She's a trained journalist, and she now works with people in palliative care, and she sits with them and invites them to tell the stories of their lives, which she writes down and shares with them. She'll speak a bit more about that when I pass the torch to her, and she will. That's also, there's a lot more about what Sabrina does for her work in our first talk, which you can find on YouTube right now. So this is talk number 2, which grew out of talk number 1. And our topic for the day is, what are the 5 things dying people don't regret? And we wanted to ask this question, Sabrina in particular wanted to ask this question, and I wanted to push the question a little bit to say, well, how does this affect how we live right now, and how we write, make up stories as writers? So we're going to talk along those lines. Sabrina's going to tell us a little bit about how this idea first came to her, and then we're going to talk about each one, each point, each of the 5 things one at a time, with and give some examples. And here and there we'll sprinkle in some story ideas, maybe from films, and maybe pose a few questions. So we'll get through all 5 in the talk, and we'll leave some room for some Q&A at the end. So that's the rough idea, and it's a live endeavor. So some unexpected things might happen too. So let's see. So let me turn it over to Sabrina. Please let us know, where did you get this great idea?
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to see you all. I was invited a few weeks ago to speak at a conference for mental health because, like, one of the organizers had heard about my work with the dying, my biography work with the dying, and she asked me if I could speak on like how do dying people look back at challenges and crisis in their lives. And I remember saying to April, like, I'm sure when there's a Q&A, this one question will come up that always comes up. And the question is, what do dying people regret? And I think everyone who is working in palliative care, who had done an interview, was asked this question. Like, I'm asked this question all the time. I mean, this is the German version. So it's the top 5 things that dying people regret. The Australian writer Bronnie Ware wrote a bestseller on that topic. So the thing though is that my answer is a bit different. Like, I usually say, well, astonishingly, there are not that many regrets. Um, and I wondered why that is. Probably because the people I work with, the people who bring up the courage to talk about their lives in the face of death, maybe they don't have that many regrets because that's what gives them the courage to speak about their life and to look at it knowing that there's not much time left to fix anything or do anything different. So in my experience, what I witnessed over the past 5 years, that the people I've talked to, and it didn't matter how old they were, they lived a fulfilled life, and that didn't necessarily mean that only good things happen in that life, but that they lived fully through all their experiences. So for that talk, I spontaneously that talk on mental health, I spontaneously decided I pose a different question. So my headline was the same headline than today. What are the 5 things that dying people don't regret? Um, so I'm going to go, as April said, through my 5 insights, and then April, every now and then, she may interrupt me and say a few things about it from her storytelling perspective. So point number one, what dying people don't regret is that they've listened to their inner voice. Um, what I learned from talking to dying people, that it is worth taking a little risk every now and then, to take a leap of faith and just do what your true inner voice tells you. Um, I believe that we all have that little compass within ourselves that we can trust, that it will navigate us through living an authentic life full of integrity. And I also believe that one very hard things to come to terms with when giving a terminal diagnosis is that you haven't lived in accordance with your true self, and that it may now be, yeah, too late to experience what that feels like. And to give you an example, what listening to your inner voice can look like or feel like, I want to introduce you to Ben. Ben was a single man in his 50s. He grew up by the sea. He had sailed a lot in his youth, but the older he got, the more and more his work had taken over. But one day he told me, while sitting in his living room, listening to classical music, he remembered an old big dream of his, and then he made a life-changing decision. And now I'm going to read from Ben's booklet. Obviously, the original is in German, but I've translated it, and I hope you all understand everything. So this is Ben speaking now. I still remember the moment I realized that I wanted to leave my job and buy a sailing boat. I was listening to a piece called The Parson's Farewell on my headphones and let my eyes wander over my bookshelves. I have two large walls of books in my study, and suddenly, at the moment I was listening to that piece, my eye was caught by the first book by Wilfried Erdmann. That's the German sailor who had just died, someone I really appreciated. The book is called My Destiny is Called Katina, and it's about an amazing journey he made in a very small boat in the 1960s. He has always been my role model when it comes to sailing. And at that moment, it wasn't just a click, it was like a chime. Ben, why don't you have a boat anymore? You always wanted to go on a big sailing trip. I got really excited. Then I thought, of course you're going to do it now. You've saved some money, you're not married, you don't have children, it hasn't happened to you, you are fit and strong. Now is the right time. Yes, and then I started looking. I knew pretty much exactly what kind of boat I wanted. It was clear to me. Now you get out of your job and go sailing. And when I told a few people, some of them really liked the idea. Some had already noticed that I wasn't really happy with my whole life situation and that I wanted to do something different. But some also said, you're crazy, giving up a good job like that. Don't do that. And it did took a bit effort to do that because you're leaving your comfort zone and giving up everything you have. You can only keep a few things, but that's what I wanted. I had accumulated too much junk and clutter, so it was also a chance to free myself. Looking back, I think there was something like a higher intuition at play. In the back of my mind was definitely the time when my mother died of cancer, and I still had the words of my father in my ear, who had said at the time, we still wanted to do so much. We wanted to go traveling and all the other things. Of course, we cannot always quit our job and just go off traveling. Like Mark was in the lucky position that he didn't have a family to support. But listening to your inner voice doesn't have to be to, make that one big life-altering decisions. But I believe there are situations in all of our lives where, we can just pause for a moment and ask ourselves, what is it that I really want to do right now? And who am I listening to? Whom do I want to please, like other people or myself? Mark only had a few months with his boat because then COVID came and he was stuck in a harbor in Portugal for a few months. And when he was finally free to sail again, he developed his first cancer symptoms that eventually forced him back to Germany, where he was giving his terminal diagnosis. But he said that he never regretted to listening to his inner voice on that one day. And yes, as he said, in hindsight, he thought maybe that inner voice already knew what was about to come, at that his time was sparse. Listening to your inner voice. April, have you anything to say to that, or should I continue?
Yeah, no, let me just jump in for a second and really just to ask everyone who's listening to reflect on that point, listening to the inner voice, because I do think, as you said, that we all have this compass, we all have this relationship that might be a bit of a push pull. We might have a bit of a sense of inner conflict. Like, do we listen to that voice, or do we listen to that one? Is it right? We doubt that voice sometimes, but I bet most people here have had at least one experience in life where they heeded that inner voice and it took them on the next step of their journey that felt really true. And maybe there was another time too where they didn't heed it and they noticed that they didn't go where they wanted to go. So just, I mean, take a moment, each of you who are listening, to reflect on that, because this relationship with our inner voice is a lifelong relationship and it has its ups and downs. It's not like we get it once and it's clear. Um, but that story, and I just need to say something, because that story, just, I think you're trying to change the names to protect the innocent, because we
Yeah.
have Mark Ben, who's really the same person, right? Because we
Oh,
had two.
sorry. Yes,
Yeah,
but you
no,
don't
it's just
know if Mark
just
or
so
Ben
nobody's,
do that.
yeah,
Sorry.
just so it's nobody's confused that yeah, the story's about Mark, just, yeah, to protect, yeah, a little bit. But
Sorry.
what a beautiful story, what a beautiful tale, and the tale of timing. And just because everybody here has also lived through COVID, maybe you've had an experience like that too, the before COVID and after COVID. He was really affected by that. So hold on to that idea, listen to your inner voice. And I'll just say, we'll come back to stories later, but many stories have this as part of the storytelling structure there, where a character does have to pause and reflect and say, what is my inner voice telling me, and follow that. So it's something we keep needing to be reminded of. So yeah, so let's tell us about number two. What's the second point?
Um, to view challenges and crisis as significant rather than random. In life, different than to writing, we don't always have an influence on what happens to us, but we do have an influence on how we deal with these things. And we can ask ourselves, and I would ask the people I worked with, like when they would speak about a very challenging times in their lives, were there gifts in this crisis? And what are the gifts? It's never about glossing over sad things, but about, like I say, about discovering the beauty in sadness. And I said that before, to have had a full life does not mean to have experienced only good things, but a full life means to have really lived through the fullness of life, including all the ups and downs. I mean, you probably agree that you don't go to the cinema to see a movie where only good things are happening to the protagonist. You'd walk out the cinema after 45 minutes if there wasn't a crisis or a conflict, because we want to watch, we want to see the protagonist change in the course of those various challenges, and that he eventually, albeit with some difficulty, embraces this transformation. So I like to let Anna speak now. It's Anne in English. We say Anne in German. A lesbian woman in her late 60s who rose her now adult Black son by herself. And she's been through some struggles in her life, including her mental health. And yeah, I want her to tell you in her own words how she dealt with it. Oh, and she's been a nurse, by the way. I've always been a passionate nurse. I also worked in child and adolescent psychiatry for a while, 6 or 7 years. But I have to be honest, that was 5 years too many. It was very stressful. The things you experience with children and young people, it's terrible. I ended up in a psychosomatic hospital myself. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore, so I had to go to therapy. On the other hand, I wouldn't have been able to do that kind of work if I couldn't have empathized with them so deeply. Unfortunately, I've also been bullied 2 or 3 times in my professional life, but I had to deal with it somehow. Those times always sucked, but it's important to come out of things like that stronger, that you can look back on it and say, so that's behind you now, cheer up and move on. I always found that very important. I may have had to keep my head up for a long time with some things, but my head stayed up, and at some point I was able to keep going. And I think that's actually quite good. I'm very proud of the fact that I always pulled myself out of it again, especially almost always by my own hair, or I made a conscious decision to get help when I could no longer do it myself. I also went through a tough phase when I realized that I was gay. It felt like saying, I'm sick. That used to be the case. It was very different. It was a very different time to today. It's still not ideal today, but it's honestly better than it was back then. That was a really difficult time for me. I was really close to taking my own life twice. It was really tough. I just didn't feel like a normal person. It was a hard path until I figured it out all for myself and found someone I could live with. But if you are not prepared to go the hard path, you'll fall by the wayside. That's the way it is. In hindsight, I actually managed it all quite well. I think that's great. I think life takes a lot of courage. Looking back, when I think about the times when people who were very close to me took their own lives, or when I was about to, sometimes it takes more courage to go on living than to kill yourself. Although today I would never again face the choice of killing myself or continuing to live, because I now feel that life is such a great gift from God that I shouldn't end it myself. But you have to get there first, to be really at peace with yourself and see it that way. My whole life has helped me in doing so. The birth of my son has given me a lot, but also some special conversations, for example, with a priest who has confirmed to me that being a lesbian is not a sin. That was Anna.
Can I ask you about what Anna said there, wrote, spoke about? This was when you met her, so she was had a terminal diagnosis at that
Oh,
point. She was
yeah.
dying. This is how she was reflecting on her life, about her hardships. Can you say anything more about your experience sitting with her then and asking her about those difficult times, or did she really come forward with them herself?
Well, Anna was one of the my first patients when I discovered how vital and important it was to honor the difficult moments in life too, because there's another a chapter in Anna's story where she speaks about a very difficult situation she had with her deceased father. And see, I go back to the patient's bedside and read the story out aloud. And in that first draft, I left out that bit because I thought, she wouldn't want it to have it in there. I thought it was something that, she just told me, but that it wouldn't be something that she'd like to pass on. So I read out her story, and then she said, well, this is all great, but what happened to the bit with my father? And it was then, it was a really like awakening moment for me, that from that one on, I never, well, I let them decide what they wanted to keep in their documents or not. But I would always read out like what I call the director's cut to them, like to witness, bear witness to their struggles, and yeah, to kind of prove to them, yes, this is true. This was true what happened to you. And it wasn't good. It wasn't okay. And I'm sorry that had happened to you. And then they can decide whether they want to pass it on to their loved ones. But yeah,
But
but what I liked about her in particular, like she was in very good spirits.
mm,
She had a tough life, but everything that had happened to her also helped her in her current situation. Yeah. And she was surrounded with love because
mhm.
she never herself never stopped loving, especially her son and her partner. And yeah.
I think that's just a really interesting point about your own work too, that that was a learning moment for you. So from that point, like I mean, I know you never saw it as your job to choose what to leave in and what to leave out, but there would be a sensitivity, I suppose, early on. And then from that point, you're like, oh, this is so important. And this is probably what made this point so important for you to observe, that this must be included, and the person can edit out if they want to, not leave that behind, but to honor the whole life and the whole person, including the challenges and the crises. Yeah. And it does take tremendous courage to look back and see things, and see how, I guess what the gift is with that conversation too is that she could see how she dealt with it, kind of witness herself in the retelling, go, oh, I handled it quite well, those were tough times.
Totally. And it's interesting though that sometimes the documents that are rather sad, um, well, they are never like there's no story. Well, I always say that this is so much more than just a sad story because there's always beauty and love to be found in a sad story. But what I experience is that when I hand out the booklet, and especially like the hard ones, sometimes like brutal experiences, those patients are most grateful. Like it's tears like streaming down their face, and they're actually happy. It's I think it's kind of, yeah, kind of confirmation of the hardship. The confirmation is not the right word. Maybe April, you can help me with that. Um, Testament. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good one, that it's witnessed, it's real, that it's sort of proof that the truth is so much more powerful than
Mhm.
stories. The stories of truth are more powerful than the ones that gloss over those
Yeah.
difficult things. So if we so number two, which is not a regret of most people, is, view to if they've had the courage to view the challenges and crises in their lives, as significant rather than random. And we talked in our last talk about how when we're living, we can't, all the experiences that happen to us, the things we go through seem very random. They don't make a lot of sense until we have a bit of hindsight, whether in midlife or later, much, at the end of life, looking back. Um, but that if we can choose, if we can sort of practice at least being open to the idea that when we're going through something difficult, that it is significant. It will reveal its significance and its meaning at another time, even if we don't see it or feel it right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And and speaking to the writers in the room, with when it comes to writing, we are creating challenges and crises for our characters. We're writing fiction. Um, Generally, if we're writing a memoir, we're having to look at where the problems were, and we're telling stories about the problems, about the challenges and the crises. It's almost like without challenges and crises, there is no story, because as you said, and we've talked about before, those are the things in life that change us, that help us grow, that give us opportunities to change our views and change our beliefs, usually for the better, and yeah, help us deepen our own characters. And we can look back on that in life. It's really hard to live through it though. And this is one thing, just as a writerly aside, writers can sometimes have a hard time making things hard on their characters, but
Hmm.
because we don't want things to be hard in life. And I just want to, and I always try to tell writers, okay, this is where story and life are very, very different. We don't want to call in the hardships in life. We don't want to make difficult things happen um, in our lives. We want to keep things as steady and calm and safe as possible. But we want to do the opposite in stories, because readers want to vicariously live through those problems as a way of sorting out how they might deal with things in their own lives. That's one aspect, one sort of gift of stories, of reading stories is we can find out how other people survived and dealt with certain problems. So there's that old saying in storytelling: chase your character up a tree and throw rocks at them, um, and eventually get them down out of the tree. But what are the challenges? What are the crises that will lead to that transformation that you mentioned? We are going to, as we live our lives, we're going to have them no matter what. Um, and it's our choice about how we deal with them, as you said. And they'll seem random at the time, but we have to sort of show up and deal with them as best we can. And I would say I'd go back to number one a little bit, that sometimes listening to the inner voice can help you deal with them. Sometimes listening to the inner voice will get you into a challenging situation that turns out to
Mhm.
be good. So that's the other thing, is all of these things are kind of interrelated. But thank you. Was there anything more you wanted to say about Anna's story or challenges? No, because it kind of like leads right into the next one, number three. So
Yeah, number three, living your life in 3 acts. We spoke about that one already a bit in our first talk, but I think it's worthwhile repeating it in the context of today's title.
yeah, say that again. So
Yeah,
living your life as if it's in three acts, seeing your
yeah,
life as
as if,
unfolding through various stages. That's what, so number three is,
yeah,
yeah, living your life in 3 acts as a headline for this idea.
um,
Seeing your life as a story.
exactly. Um, in my work, of course, like I have an hour or an hour and a half with the person, so I can't. It's not about retelling the whole life, but I travel with the person through the main phases of their lives. And the points that are characterized by major change. So I'd say childhood and adolescence would be the first act, about 25%. And then the second act, about 50%. And that includes everything you do in adulthood, from your career to starting a family or not starting a family, up until retirement, if you're lucky enough to get there. So that's the period roughly from 60 to 80, again, if you are allowed to live to that age. That's the third act. And I find that the following questions can be of relevance when it comes to letting go in the face of death. Have I made these transitions from one act to the next consciously? And how did I design them? Like, did I design them? In palliative care, like my colleagues and I, we sometimes see people, especially men, who still work in their late 70s or early 80s, and then they are surprised by their diagnosis, and that there's only that little time left to do all the other things that they wanted to do. So it can be also vital to ask yourself at that stage, or that, when you're at that bridge from the second to the third act, who am I when I am no longer working? Who do I want to be? And I mean, I'm in middle age now, and I can tell you, and you probably can agree, that there are many women and men also in the second act, like who are officially in the second act, but they still think or rather behave as if they were still in the first act. And I think this is a lot of that has to do with FOMO, the fear of missing out. And I know especially men don't like to hear that, but middle age for men starts at 39 statistically. um, so maybe one way to deal with FOMO, fear of missing out, could be to realize that no matter how old you get, there won't be enough time to do all the things and to meet all the people you'd like to meet anyways. This is actually something that Ben, the sailor guy from point number one, said to me, because he said, oh, like every time when I say I'm only 56, that people look at me with a sad face. I'm like, oh, you're dying with 56. And he was like, yes, but I've done so many things. Like I've crammed lots of things into those 56 years. So and I won't have enough time to see all the places I'd like to see anyways. So So by looking at your life in three acts and by living each one of them consciously, you'll automatically get a lot out of each act. Um, and a couple of years ago, I met Siegfried, very German name, who was in his early 70s, dying of cancer. And I think he did that, living your life in three acts, very well. So he's a good example. I let him speak. I'm getting fed up. This illness is making me tired, and it's also taking the drive out of me. I'm not used to feeling so flat. But what can I do? I recognize when a fight is pointless and when it's not. And this fight is pointless. What should I fight? And above all, against whom? What am I supposed to do? I don't stand a chance. I'm simply trying to live with this illness as long and as well as possible. That's my strategy. And from everything I've read and heard, it makes sense. Getting all worked up and fighting pointlessly is not my way. In my job, I could never understand when people didn't know when to stop. For me, life is a symbiosis of work and life, and everyone has to find the right path for themselves. And it makes no sense to work until you drop dead. You have to be clear about that, and it's always been clear to me, right from the start. I had a good friend who recently passed away. We were both marketing assistants in the same company in the early 70s, so that was ages ago. And back then, we both made a bet. And the last time I met him, he showed me this old piece of paper that I had signed. It read, "I hereby guarantee that I, Siegfried Schumann, will work until my 50th birthday at the most. And from then on, and you, dear Peter, are cordially invited to join me. I will sail around the world." I think he worked up until his late 50s or early 60s. I'm not sure, but he did retire quite early. It was always clear to me, work, yes. Work hard, yes, but not until the day I die. When I was in the prime of my career and had many older colleagues, I saw for myself how they were no longer able or willing to understand and could not follow the path that the younger ones wanted to take. Although they were tolerated by the management, they were basically sidelined. I realized that, and I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to spend another 10 years with them, but without any significant influence or clout in the company. I felt sorry for those people, and even sorrier for those who didn't notice. There were also some who did notice, who then kept a low profile and became quieter and quieter. I was always very sensitive. I always knew exactly where I stood and where I belonged.
Hmm. No, that's a great
React.
story. It's again, it's so I just want to remind everybody that as Sabrina reads out these stories of people, I believe so far of the three that you read, you've shared with us, these people have all passed on. These are their words, right? I know you have some stories. There's a few people who survived after you'd met them, but I just want to honor the stories they left behind and appreciate them.
Mhm.
Um, this we talked much more about the story, life in three acts. We talked about that in the first talk a bit more. So if you want a bit more background, look at that one. But this idea of sort of a story broken down into three acts has those ratios, and those ratios of sort of 20 to 25%, 50 to 60%, 20 to 25% for the first, second, and third acts it's a pattern that just recurs over and over again. And you'll see this in stories and movies if you go and start paying attention. And it seems to mimic how we live and how we are in life. So this is why we're coming back to it, both Sabrina and I, as being kind of a pivotal um, approach, not one to be held lightly, right? It's just like, oh, let's use this pattern to inform how we might live and make our choices. And I just want to mention something too. You spoke a couple times about retirement. And so I just want to just add a nuance here, which is we're not advocating for no work in the third act
Oh,
of
no.
life. Yeah, this is more about, it's more about the quality of your intention around working. There's a lot of creative people in our group right here, so we're probably going to be doing that kind of work, our creative work, until we die. I mean, that's just how creativity flows through. But I think it's like, how do you bring a quality of awareness to each stage of your life? And are you functioning, is your intention coming from a desire to prolong a phase you're no longer in and resist moving into the next? Or are you willing to take what you know and carry it into the next act? So just I want to touch on a few ideas about stories. This is not a be all end all list, but I wanted to give people a few ideas about how this fits in the stories that we watch, and maybe the stories that we might be telling. So just across the board, most of the stories that you're going to read or go to see the movies about they're about the second act of life. There's a lot that goes on in that big middle section anyways, but they're about the trials and tribulations of living. They're almost all second act stories. Where you see a bit of a difference is that a lot of the coming of age stories, and there are many of them, a lot of them are dealing with the first act of life, which is a time when we're growing up and choosing our values and our directions in life. Act two, those act two stories are really about how do we live and how do we respond to the challenges and crises, and how do we adapt our values and choices, if, to be more in alignment with our true selves, maybe listening to that inner voice. You'll have a lot of inner voice stories going on in the second act too, as well. There are definitely stories about the later stages of life and older characters, but there aren't as many as I think there ought to be, and or they're not as popular. They're not as mainstream because there are a lot more that we don't necessarily know or hear about, and they always have been sprinkled out. So I'm just going to give you I'm going to give you a handful of examples that I just from my own sort of memory. I didn't do an extensive research list, but when I think of coming of age stories and first act stories, I think of movies like The Wizard of Oz, or a more recent one is like Lady Bird, one of Greta Gerwig's films. There was this beautiful movie called Moonlight that interestingly was told as a triptych, but was really about childhood, youth, and early adulthood of this young Black man who is gay. It's a great film. These are all just really random to give you an idea of the wide variety. One I love is A Room with a View, which is about a young E.M. Forster's novel, which turned into a movie, about a young woman who's living with the constraints of her culture, expectations around her family, and has to listen to her inner voice by the very end to kind of follow her own heart. So those are some of the ideas that come up, some of the themes that are being played with. Even To Kill a Mockingbird, it's about the first act of life, but it is paired with a father's story of Atticus Finch later in life. So you'll see a lot of overlap in those kinds of stories too. But when we get to the third act, there aren't as many. Some that came to my mind recently was the movie Beginners with Christopher Plummer, which is actually a father or son story. So you've got a second act story plus a third act story between the two characters. And that's about a man who's lived his life, and his wife dies, and he comes out as a gay man at age 75, and then chooses to live his life as a gay man in the third act of his life. This is often a time to resolve unfinished business, to deal with some personal issues, to listen to that inner voice if you haven't yet. So it's not about stopping things necessarily, but it's about harvesting what your life has been about. So it's a time to ask, am I living my truth? And if not, what am I going to do about it? So just to put another spin on it. So we'll come back. I'm sure we could unpack this much more, but we have two more to get through. So before our
Yeah.
talk is done. So let's circle back to the stories later, or maybe in the discussion later. But just to say that, look at the stories from that perspective as you're going out in life. Just for another lens, put on another set of glasses. Like, is this first act, second act, third act? See how they overlap. Okay, number 4, Sabrina.
Number 4, integrating mortality and the impermanence of life. Not everyone makes it to the third act. And I want to acknowledge that luckily not that often, but I do meet people in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. Um, but I do see that it's still possible to have a peaceful death, um, and not many regrets. And that's why it's it's probably helpful to pretend from time to time that you are already in the third act of your life. And what I mean by that is to ask yourself, again, the inner voice maybe, the following questions. What would I do if I didn't have long to live, if this was my last act? And that's important now. I don't mean that in terms of a bucket list, like, parachute jumping or traveling to the Caribbean. Because often, I mean, this is all fine, but bucket lists are often about consuming or possessing, and are more about satisfying the ego, maybe. And I want to address the soul level here. So, for instance, you could ask your inner voice, what is the story you want people to tell about yourself after you're gone? Or which story, or before that, like which story do you want to tell about your life when it's about to end, when you're speaking to a story nurse like me, for instance? And from my experience in working with the dying, the generativity aspect is very important in that regard. What does that mean? People want to see that they made a difference in life, and in general, for the greater good, or in someone's life in particular. So they want to leave traces. They want to be remembered, and ideally in a good and in a meaningful way. So in the second act, I'd say the latest, we may start wondering, what spiritual legacy is it that we want to leave behind? And realizing this generativity aspect can be disconcerting at first, because we are considering a time where we won't be here anymore. But I find like it can also stimulate curiosity, and maybe make us want to create something that will outlast ourselves. And again, this doesn't have to be, I don't know, winning the Nobel Prize or writing a book, although there are many writers. It's great to have a book out, but it's often the small things, or maybe the things that seem small at first, which can have a huge impact in terms of generativity. I want to give you a little example. And as I said, I want to honor the fact that sometimes people are dying young. Lena I think she was 34 when I met her. She was a young kindergarten teacher. She always wanted to have children on her own, but she couldn't because she got sick. She got cancer. But she got to experience a love so strong that even that terminal illness couldn't break it. She had met Patrick, I think just a year before she got sick. And then he became her caregiver and her husband at the same time. So I just want to read, like, it's a smaller quote from Lena. I just wish I had a lot more time. Fortunately, I have always expressed my feelings. I always have. The people who are close to me have always heard me say what they mean to me, and I hope that they will always remember these words. There are certainly many things I regret, but there's no point worrying about them. Time is simply too short for that now. My wish for now is that I manage to have a little more time relatively pain-free, because pain has dominated my life over the past year, and life is simply too short for pain. But there was no other way. It was just the way it was. That's something I've learned about life, that it really is far too short. That's also a cliche, but it really is the case. I would say to all the children I accompanied, accompanied before my illness, that what matters in life is always being able to laugh. I think that's what matters. It helps a lot. You shouldn't forget to laugh. But in this difficult year that lies behind me, there's also a gift. To experience such love is simply incredible. I would never have thought that. I think 90% of people would have left, and Patrick stayed. It's a love of a lifetime in fast motion, in a time lapse, and it's just a shame that we both didn't get to experience it for many, many years. This intense, deep love. The fact that I was able to experience it is simply amazing. I carry this knowledge that he is the right man in my heart, no matter what. Number 4.
Yeah, that was, yeah. I'm not sure if we got the headline for number 4. So it's kind of
Oh,
nice to get the headline at the end of the stories. So listen for it, what these stories have showed us. What was our
the,
headline for that?
our headline was Integrating Mortality and the Impermanence of Life. And sometimes that is forced on you by a terminal diagnosis. But as Lena said, like she always told people what they meant to her. And she spoke about her feelings, and she they experienced that love together, and it was like she expressed it a bit more to me, like she knew that if they had grown old together, that she got sick then, that he would have been that man who would clean her or change her underwear, like he did all that now, when he could have run off and be with another girl, but he chose to stay. And they had also, the little moments, they lying in bed when she was feeling well enough and watching a movie, and as she said earlier, and laughed together watching cartoons and playing video games. So but knowing that this won't last, but do it
Yeah,
anyway.
and that
So
and that it's that knowing that I think that it's why it's on the list of the things that dying people don't regret, is being willing to face that, like integrate that sense of mortality, integrate the truth of it early on, as early as you can, because we don't know what's going to happen. And as you've experienced, many people are dying younger than what might seem like an average 3 acts. And so integrating mortality and the impermanence of life every day if you can. I mean, these things, we sometimes don't want to look at them, but if we can live alongside them and practice, we don't have to get it right. We don't have to, this isn't about mastery. It's just about practicing these 5 things.
Exactly, but it's like with your partner. You love your partner, but he or she will die or will leave, or you leave first. It's not going to last as much as you want it. So I think it's also about to love someone not only because he or she makes you feel good, or because you want him or her to stay, but because she or he is so precious, because one day, well, it's not going to last. One day, we have to part.
And this, I just want to
Mm.
harken back to number 3 here too, because actually if you choose to see life as a pattern of the 3 acts, you can have that as a cycle of 3 acts. The pattern goes over all kinds of things. It goes over phases of life. It goes over experiences of life. So we can practice the act 1, act 2, act 3 of different experiences in our lives, so that we're practicing letting go. We're practicing impermanence at that point. We go to university and there's a beginning, middle, and end story of that, and then we leave and it's over. Or certain parts of childhood, or living in another country, or being in relationships, or being with loved ones, being with our elders, and their literal passing, the literal death. So just sometimes using that as a tool, that lens as a tool, beginning, middle, and end, can help us in that practice of integrating mortality as well, that we're a part, our lives are part of this repeating pattern that's in nature around us all the time, and in all kinds of other experiences. Okay, we're getting near the end of our talk, so we have to let's get to number 5. um, of the five, and see where that leads us, and we'll eventually get to the Q&A. Yeah.
Number 5, and that's probably the hardest, both in dying and living, maybe in writing too, letting go of control. I realize time and again that when it comes to dying, giving up control can make a big difference. To accept reality, as painful as it is, because when you switch from fight and resistance mode to acceptance mode, you can focus on the here and now and on how you can and want to live the remaining time well and consciously. Many people who are seriously ill wish they had more time, or that they are that they'd be given more time. And the truth is that due to modern medicine, like including chemotherapy, therapy or radiotherapy, they have long since arrived in their more time, like their more time is now while they are waiting for more time. And to consciously use and shape this time, I've witnessed can bring many gifts to life, many gifts that you would otherwise miss out on. So yeah, you would miss out on them if you spend that remaining time stoically fighting and waiting yeah, for a new therapy. However, experiencing such a loss of control consciously, or perhaps even making the conscious decision to do so, can also release something positive while you are still alive. For instance, it may help with lifting depression, and that's my last example that I want to talk about. I want to let Stephen speak, Steffen in German, Stephen, a 60-year-old man. He was dying of cancer, and he had been suffering from chronic depression since his youth. And he passed on that depression gene, if you can call it that, to his 18-year-old daughter. And so in his document, he would talk about his depression and, you know, pass some wisdom on to his daughter. So yeah, let's Stephen tell us about the ultimate loss of control, receiving his terminal diagnosis, and how it, at least to some extent, cured his chronic depression. I would say that my depression has faded into the background since the cancer, but not because I'm dying, but because I've lost so much control. For example, lying awake at night and thinking I can't breathe, I'm going to die. And I've experienced that so often now that it's no longer scary. Because I actually believe that's a really important experience when you experience this loss of control and realize that you're not dying, that it takes away most of the depression, and that you grow up in a way. The depression will always remain in some way, but differently. Perhaps no longer as dominant, perhaps no longer as important. But there are elements that simply won't disappear, that you might be more sensitive or whatever. That will always remain. But I sometimes get annoyed when I look back now at how many years I spent in fear, completely unnecessarily. I wasted time on something that wasn't real. The diagnosis has pushed all that into the background. Oh, I remember how bad it was at first. I really had the worst doctor. I went into the hospital without any idea and had a gastroscopy and a colonoscopy. Then I woke up in the room and a doctor came in and said, "That was it. You are practically dead now. You have cancer, you're getting a stoma. You don't have long to live. Goodbye." And then he left again. That was Friday afternoon, and I was sitting there thinking, huh? What did he just tell me? I have cancer, I'm dying, I'm getting a stoma. And then I called my family. It was still COVID time and no one was allowed to visit me. I said, I just had a really strange encounter with the doctor who had told me I have to die. And then somehow I lay there in hospital until Sunday evening with these thoughts. At some point, I asked the nurse if I could speak to another doctor. couldn't live with what I've been told in such a heartless way. And then the head physician came again. He then said, yes, you do have cancer, that's true, but your examinations haven't all been completed yet. Afterwards, of course, I got everything the other doctor had said, but the head physician simply put it into perspective a bit. And then I thought, okay, what kind of performance was that from the other man before? I would have liked to have met him again, just to tell him that he should choose a different profession. Anyway, I lay awake in hospital for 2 days, full of fear and terror. And I remember my family came down the path at some point, and I was able to wave through the window. And that's when I think I lost my fear. Because that was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Someone comes in and says I'm dying. I'm alone in a room in the hospital, and nobody talks to me. And then I said to myself that I have to try to get through this time, so as not to go mad and somehow lose my mind. And I somehow managed to do that. And after that, I think it was mostly over. Since then, I've been getting into the MRI scanner and being pushed through the tube, doing the wildest things, the worst operations over 6 hours. It's all the same to me. It's crazy. I'm no longer afraid of it all, or at least it's limited. So if there was an initial spark, then it was this insanely bad performance by the first doctor. He was my ass angel. Yeah, totally. Don't know if you say that in English. Ass angel.
No, I
Or
don't.
it's like asshole and angel in the same person.
Oh, I see. That is a powerful story. And this last headline about letting go is one of the biggest and hardest. And again, we could unpack it in so many ways, like over a long period of time. But it's a headline, and it's something for us to each look at about how can we let go. And I will say, I mean, this is a bit of a generalization, but the really good stories that we're reading or that we're watching in the cinema, the really good stories include all of these elements. They include the reminders of this. Like, how do we just let go and let life? And I just want to circle back very, very briefly to that movie, A Room with a View, about Lucy Honeychurch. I said it was a bit about the inner voice, but it's even more so about letting go. At the very, very end, she lets go of her inner constraints about what she should do and follows her heart. And that too is, if we're in life living, we have those chances to let go at any point, to take that leap, take the risk and make the leap to let go. And then in a way, maybe it prepares us for that ultimate letting go that you shared with Stephen's story, which was that it has this tremendous power to maybe erase or significantly diminish the things that weigh us down so much, that we can let go. Anyways, they're all very big topics. Do you, Sabrina, want to just list them again? And
Yeah.
Ella's going to pop them in the chat.
Yeah. The first one was listening to your inner voice. The second one was view challenges and crises as significant rather than random. Oh my God, the third one was living your life in 3 acts, or as in
Yep.
3 acts. April, you've been correcting me there.
It's both are good.
Okay, number 4, integrating mortality and the impermanence of life. And number 5 was letting go of control. And just one more thing, a little happy end. Remember Mark from, or was it Ben?
Mark,
Well,
Ben.
anyway,
Ben, Mark.
Ben Mark.
Yes.
The first story, he survived.
He was one. Oh, wow. He's only one of the 3 you've told me
Yeah,
about. Oh,
he
he did.
he left hospice. Yeah, he was in an inpatient hospice here
Wow.
in Hamburg. Um, I met him, I think, oh my God, a year and a half ago. And then a few months after we met, I was told that he has moved out, which like rarely happens. And he's been able to pick up his boat in Spain and go sailing. Like, I don't know if he's it's barely like, an eternal cure. I mean, there's no eternity for any one of us. But what I thought was interesting with Mark, and I've seen that with one other person who so far has survived, that both were fine with dying. Like they were sad, yes, but
Mm,
they they were okay with the process. And I just find that interesting that they have been giving these extra time,
mm,
whereas sometimes others are really clinging on to life and fighting and yeah, ignoring what's happening to them. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. So yes, the other four they've died, but number one,
Or Mark Ben, he went back to sailing. He went back to sailing. That was the true back to his inner voice. That's a nice note to end on. In fact, these conversations have been kind of spontaneous and impromptu. We plan a little bit, but we allow a lot to happen. But they sort of lead naturally into another level of conversation. And so Sabrina and I have decided to host one more on December 8th, that will be about good endings in life and in writing. That'll be the loose title, the loose topic that we're going to circle around and create a talk about and carry on these stories. I just want to say that I know we unpacked a lot. We opened a lot of lids, I would say, in this conversation, more than we could fully converse about. But I hope it's at least stimulated some thoughts, maybe some feelings, maybe some ideas of your own. And I just want to thank you for being at this talk, for tuning in and listening. We will shift into some Q&A for those who are here live, some discussion, and we'll follow up with a little email with the recording and notes about the next talk. And I just want to say, yeah, thank you to Sabrina for sharing those stories. Thank you to all the people. They aren't characters; they're real people who've left their wisdom behind, and with your help, you're sharing some of the bigger ideas, of their stories, and to help us live. Because yeah, that's what we talked about before. But what do the dying, what do dying people regret is often triggered by the rest of us still living. What what can we learn? How can we prepare ourselves? And I think these 5 things really help us to prepare, um, for the third act, for the end of the third act, in while we're in our second acts. So let's see if we can practice these 5 things, and maybe we'll see you at the next talk. We'll turn it over to the Q&A to just join the group. And Ella, maybe you can lead us into if there's some comments or questions.
Yeah, everyone made my role pretty easy today. We didn't have any activity in the chat. So
Okay.
I think with this group, it might be, yeah, a good idea if anyone wants to kind of raise their hand and share their own question. If you feel comfortable, you're also welcome to put it in the chat and I can read it out to April and Sabrina as well.
Yep.
I think I will either, if you want to raise your hand, if you know that feature in Zoom, we can do that, and then I'll unmute you. There we go. Let's start with Claire. Okay, so I asked to unmute, and I think you get to then unmute or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, great.
There we go.
Okay.
Claire's there.
Oh, it's so fascinating, Sabrina. Thank you so much for doing this. It's amazing. I was sort of thinking about the term survivor. Like I'm not the first to sort of think about this, and people have sort of challenged that notion of, is it a healthy term, right? Like, when see with you, the breast cancer survivor, they're the survivor. I was like, is it a competition? It makes it sound as if it's a competition, like almost like a game show, right?
yeah.
And then it says like there's winners and losers, and if you well, you lost the competition. And I just feel like, is there a better word? Like, is there a German word? I mean, there's got to be a better word.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know.
I mean, I totally agree with you. And usually I say I'm not about the 2% that miraculously survive, like those stories, like those outlier stories, like that's what we see in the paper or in the magazine, someone beating the statistics. I'm advocating for the 98% who didn't die according to plan. So because their stories are just as important to tell, and I don't think there is another word, and but especially you've mentioned the Breast Cancer Society. There are up to, I think, 25 or even 30% where the cancer either comes back or they are diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer from the start, and there is this bias that they didn't go to their checkups, but it's not true. It's bad luck, and it's tumor biology. So I don't like that story of positive mindset and willpower, and that the cancer, because it didn't. It's the cards that you have been dealt with. So thanks for mentioning that. I don't like the battle language at all, because when you have a terminal diagnosis, it's never been a fair fight from the start. And exactly what you said, like, I hate when someone dies and they say he lost his battle with cancer. No, it's not true. He or she died. And so
Can I just, can I just jump in? I'm going to go, you'll remember this, Sabrina, we had this conversation before, where I'm going to sort of very loosely paraphrase part of a talk I heard that Alan Watts gave. And because I can't even find it again, and I'll go looking for it, but it's just the idea in it that is so powerful, that if all of us here took it on, it might change things. And that is, he said that we tend to equate death as a failure to live. And we get hooked on this idea of failure and loss, that somehow we've done something wrong. Dying isn't dying as a natural phase of life, but it's a failure to keep living. And so Alan Watts explained that it comes by us quite naturally, because when we're first born, we have this prerogative to live. Everybody's trying to ensure our survival, that we're, and our first sort of mission as babies is to survive. And as we grow up, it's to survive. So it's embedded in there at a very early time that to not survive is a kind of failure. You haven't done. So it's a way that our minds have been just trained, I guess, and it's a bit in our biology. But as we move through our second act, maybe as we grow and become aware of that, we can shift that. Because once we're ready to sort of see that dying is a part of it, that it's not a failure, but we're going to have to really uproot some old stuff inside our minds and inside our culture to get to take away that idea that it's bad or it's wrong or it's a failure or it's a lost battle. But it has some philosophical elements too.
It seems to me like we are creatures of story, right? So this idea there's a winner, that you survive, that you've overcome, right, is sort of falling into the story patterns. So but I think sometimes not everything has to have that kind of a story pattern, right?
No, you're right. You're absolutely right, Claire. And we're using story in a positive way, but I've been having lots of conversations as well about how story is used in a negative way, how we get attached to them. We let them rule us. We keep them from seeing our true selves and the true freedom we have. So you're right. There's a light and a dark side.
Yeah. And April, I remember you even suggested that maybe that question, what do dying people regret, is stemming from that what do I have to do in order, like, not to fail, to survive, in brackets, to not die. So it's just interesting, I think.
No.
We do have one question comment question from Brent here. Brent, did you want to speak to it yourself, or do you want me to read it out? What would be preferred?
Ask Brent to unmute.
I can restate the question. Thank you so much for your work and for today. Just wondering, it sounds like an amazing process. I can't wait to hear more about it. For whom is this work intended? Is it the person who's telling the story? Is it the biographer, you? Is it the family? Is it some kind of a general audience that loves this type of work?
It's I'd say it's everyone. So when I introduce myself to the person, I would say, well, this is something we do or we might do for your family, something that you can um, take home with you if they do go home or to hospice from the palliative care ward, for instance. So that is a gift for your family, and it is, but it's also for the person. But sometimes, or maybe most times, so they think they are doing this for their family, but really it turns out they are doing it for themselves. It's their process, yeah, of letting go in a way, and it helps them. It helps them to, and I say more about it like on the first talk, so you may want to go back to that because we don't have that much time today, but it's also about me. Yes, it's not, I'm not only an interviewer asking questions. Like I bring myself into the work, and it's very, very interesting that I get to meet people that have themes in their lives that I strongly resonate with. There are parallels in our biography, even if they are, you know, older or male or female, that doesn't matter. But it's I get a lot out of it as well. So it's not for the public. Like now I would share excerpts of booklets, you know, when I give a talk or a seminar or workshop, but it's for the person, their friends, their loved ones, and yes, for me also.
And I think it has an impact on the rest of us, of those you share some of these stories with. Like, I think we're all impacted by the stories, the excerpts that you shared. And I know that I've read Sabrina's book in a translated form. It's not yet published in English, but it's in German. But the stories in there have just stayed with me. The stories you tell and how you experience them. So I would say that it is for everyone, in the sense everyone who's interested in this human condition and how we move through these later stages, and for ourselves and for those we love. Yes, it's got far-reaching implications, I think. Powerful. Yeah, but a really good question, really good things to ruminate over. I just noticed that Beth had asked a question, a writing kind of question, but it ended up in my personal messages as opposed to the group. So the question is, in a memoir, how to assess how deeply to go in revealing or commenting upon your personal challenges and crises. Yeah, that's a good question. How many people here are writing right now? And maybe how many are writing memoir? I know not everybody has their screen, their video on, but that's a really good question. Maybe it's a little bit, maybe one fractal we can use is what Brent was just saying. Who's it for? And to what degree is it for the writer, for the reader, for the wider public, for those involved in this, who were involved in the story? I think we can all say that we've benefited from the stories that Sabrina chose to share today, those excerpts. I just felt that what a gift it was to hear those people's voices through their words about what they'd undergone. I mean, it affected me, it changed something in me. And I think trusting that. So Beth, do you want to say anything in particular about that? Yeah.
The only thing that I would say is, if one is like I am, you know, worried about going in too much to the messiness, I think acknowledging the problems or the challenges in, say, the second act as being part of the driver of a good story, even a good memoir. It's finding that truthful sweet spot that honors the reader, of not overdoing it. You know, like you know.
Okay, well, I have an answer just came to my mind, which is a writing coach kind of answer, a story coach kind of answer. which I often have to give to my memoir clients too, which is there's no need to analyze what happened. Show, don't tell.
Right.
Let me just have one caveat, which has come up in a different conversation with a different client. Show what happens so that your reader can interpret for themselves what's happening.
Right.
But allow yourself the opportunity to give your own experience, your own response to what's happening. So a response rather than an analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of the gift of a memoir is to be inside somebody else's emotional landscape and understand how they truly felt. So show, don't tell the details, the action, but your own response is a kind of action.
It's almost like weather.
Yeah, but your own, but analysis doesn't, there's no need for analysis. You leave that gap so that the reader can step in and bring their own understanding. So there's just places where they can fill in the gaps.
So I do see that being connected to what Sabrina has been sharing with us about the 5 lessons learned, because it is a quality of truthfulness but letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not wrapping yourself up in your crisis or your challenges to prove a point.
Yeah, maybe Sabrina, you have something to say about this too, from your point of view as a witness, but also as a writer, because you too wrote about your experiences in a memoir form.
Well, I think the more personal you get, the more universal it gets. And also, I think, and I'm careful with the people I'm working with too, like you can show yourself like vulnerable, but you don't have to cut yourself open and reveal every little slice. And that, April, I think you know what I mean. You might be a bit better to explain that in English, but that balance between fragility and dignity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of an aside or like a parallel kind of idea, but with memoir, I've heard it said, I can't remember by who, and so I repeat this: always write from the scar, not the wound.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
there you have thought about it, reflected, you've analyzed it, and so you can re-experience it with a little bit more detachment to create an experience for somebody else. That's sort of the idea. And yeah, you share the story and leave it open, leave some space, but you don't have to sort of bleed on the page necessarily.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just I have that quote in my book. I think it's by Glennon Doyle. Write from your scars, not from your wounds. And she says, because then you can like harvest the gold, something along the lines. But if you write it like from the fresh wound, it can sound alarming. That you want to jump and help that person. So it's more about you, and then after some time, it's more about all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing you probably are too, Ella, but there's this great question that Suzanne brought forward. Thank you, Suzanne. It's perfect for you, Sabrina. This is a good
Suzanne,
answer.
would you like to speak it yourself, or would you like me to read it out?
I guess I can speak it. Yeah. Do you ever have a case where the person is dying after a heroic event to save them from a catastrophic event and cannot gain consciousness? And how would you if you've ever been in that situation, how would you cope with that?
Okay, I'm not quite sure if I understand the question, or if I'm lost in translation. So you mean that someone is dying after he tried to save someone in a catastrophic event? No. Okay.
I think I know it. Let me see if I've got it. Because Sabrina, the reason I thought it was perfect for you is that you've lived this. So have you been in a situation where somebody was dying, or a heroic event to save them? I'm thinking of your father.
Okay.
We were going to talk about this on the next talk, and then from a terrible thing, and then never regain consciousness. So I don't know if you're ready to talk about this.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Touch on it, maybe.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
I work either on the palliative care ward or in an inpatient hospice. And so, of course, there would be people who are not consciousness because they are already in the dying process. But obviously, those weren't the people I'd speak to. So, but what I had been thinking, because I'm not going to go into it today because we're going to do it at our next talk, I think, is I had a very personal experience when my father, well, he did gain consciousness, but he was dramatically changed. That I thought it would be nice to maybe have a loved one telling the story about that person, because when someone is not conscious, like we don't know how much that person maybe still understands. So I'm always like when I would walk into a room where someone is seemingly unconscious, I'd always talk and speak as if the person could understand me. Also, they say when someone is dying that the last sense that closes, the last sense that disappears is the sense of hearing. So maybe someone can't see any longer or not able to communicate, but a person might still hear. So what I did sometimes is this was me because I'm also like an end of life companion. So this is how I started out. So today I'm only doing the biography work, but when I started out as a volunteer, and when I would sit by the bedside of someone who is unconscious or already in the dying process, then I let the loved one maybe tell me their story, like if it was the partner. I asked them how they met, and they would retell the life story because I just like the idea that maybe that person is still able to listen, and so that someone else is leading me through their story, and that can be very helpful for the loved one as well. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, or
Yeah, no, it was just I was just curious about how you might approach something like that because I mean this happened in my family. One of my brothers
right.
died this way, and we surrounded his bedside, and his son was there. His son, um, sorry, his son.
Yeah, good.
I'll tell you later. Sorry.
It's okay. Teeth are good, teeth are healthy, and we need to share the sad stories because we all have them. And like what Claire said before, if we only tell the survival stories or the stories, of a nice, peaceful, beautiful death, then maybe other people think like something, oh my God, like something's wrong. Why didn't we get to experience that? So yeah, well,
Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. We don't have any more questions here in the chat. There's a few minutes left. Does anyone else have a question they want to raise their
Yeah,
hand?
if anybody has a question or a comment, and we welcome them, or we can also wrap up with tremendous gratitude. Thank you for being here for this kind of conversation. It's pretty much unscripted. We're just sort of opening some doors and seeing where this goes. And I think both Sabrina and I care about contributing to some of these conversations that can facilitate our living and our approach to dying for ourselves and each other, so we can be there in many ways for each other. So thank you for having an interest. We really deeply appreciate your presence here, and very grateful to have had you in the circle today. And thank you to those who have signed up and are not here and going to watch the recording later. So thank you as well. Yeah. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday. Blessings to all.
Thank
And
you.
maybe we'll see you at the next one. Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.